Today, we're tracing the deep, intersecting roots of three extraordinary African-American families in southern Maryland. We're going to see exactly how their histories, their epic court battles, and their bloodlines all converge into what I like to call a braided river. So, let's start in 2019. Picture this. Historian William G. Thomas III is relentlessly researching his book on the historic Maryland freedom suits. He's looking into all these prominent families who challenged slavery, but the Shorters, they were his white whale, the absolute last piece of the puzzle. He couldn't find a single living descendant. Then, purely by chance, Damian Amari Jackson reaches out while researching his own roots. Professor Thomas was so overwhelmed with emotion, he just told him, "I've been looking for you." Man, that gives me chills. It's a profound moment connecting centuries of history right to the present day. Now, the historical weight of these Maryland freedom suits is absolutely immense. I mean, we're talking about legal precedents that are literally still studied at Harvard Law today. Back in the late 1700s, hundreds of enslaved families sued for their freedom, and the Shorters were right at the front of the pack. See, in Maryland at the time, the law stated that a child's legal status followed the mother. So the Shorters figured out that if they could prove they descended from a free white woman, they were legally entitled to their freedom. And they didn't just sue anyone. No way. They took on the titans of Maryland society, prominent politicians, massive landowners, powerful Catholic priests like the Jesuits. They even faced off against legal giants like Francis Scott Key's uncle, Philip Barton Key. 28. Just let that number sink in for a second. That is the staggering number of freedom suits the Shorter family won in the general court in just the year 1795 alone. Think about the incredible courage and coordination that took. Against all odds, navigating a legal system completely designed to keep them enslaved, the Shorter family systematically proved their lineage in one case after case. They won more cases faster than almost any other family in the region. It was a real game changer.
Okay, so let's trace this first stream of our braided river. We're going to look at the powerful matriarchs of the Shorters and trace this back to the absolute headwaters.
This perfectly illustrates exactly how Lucy Shorter won her freedom. It all goes back to 1681. Elizabeth Shorter, a free white indentured servant, marries an enslaved man named Little Robin. Now, because Elizabeth was free, remember that rule? Her children were legally free under Maryland law. But despite that, her descendants were illegally held in bondage for generations. We can actually track the line from Elizabeth to her daughter Jenny, down to her granddaughter Appy, and finally to her great-granddaughter Lucy Shorter. And it was Lucy who bravely stood up in 1792, filed suit against Henry Neal, and in 1795 got the court to rule definitively that she and her children were free.
So the crucial point is right here in this 1850 census document. If you look closely at the free inhabitant schedule, we see Lucy's daughter, Henny Shorter, who was one of the actual children freed by that 1795 ruling, living alongside 18-year-old Isabella. Seeing Henny's name here in St. Mary's County, it's huge. This isn't just an old piece of paper. It's the physical receipt of a hard-won legal victory. Henny bridged that incredible gap from bondage to recognized free status, and here she is, passing that free status right down to the next generation.
Fast forward 10 years to 1860, and we find Isabella Shorter making her way as a free woman of color, working as a cook in a white household. You can see her listed here as Isabel, 24 years old, living independently and earning her own wage. This perfectly matches the post-freedom patterns we see for the Shorters. Having secured their liberty decades prior, folks like Isabella were now firmly established as free, paid workers in the local economy of southern Maryland.
Right, let's shift gears and look at the second stream of our river, the Dyson lineage. This is an incredible family anchored by a truly resilient matriarch.
You absolutely have to look closely at this 1880 census record for the Dysons. We find the matriarch, Sally Lewis, recorded at an astounding 100 years of age. Born right around 1780, she literally lived through the founding of the country, the entire antebellum period, the Civil War, and Reconstruction. And here she is, a century old, living with her daughter Amanda Dyson, completely anchoring this multi-generational free black family in Charles County.
Now, census takers rarely left personal notes, right? But Sally Lewis was apparently so extraordinary that the enumerator just had to jot down that she was, quote, now sewing without glasses, at 100 years old. How amazing is that? It's one of those vivid little details that transforms a name on a ledger into a vibrant, living human being of just immense fortitude.
Following this family line down, it passes from Sally to Amanda, and then to a man named George Dyson.
and George's marriage to Isabella Shorter Jr., that creates the very first major intersection of these families. Isabella Jr. was the daughter of the Isabella we just saw working as a cook, so when she and George marry, they are fusing the Dyson paternal line with the Shorter maternal line. They would eventually have 10 children, blending Sally Lewis's incredible centenarian legacy with the freedom-fighting legacy of the Shorters.
Okay, moving on to the third and final stream, the Wilson lineage. This was a prominent landholding family running right parallel to the others.
This 1850 census gives us tangible proof of the Wilsons. At the head of this family tree sits 60-year-old Sally Wilson, born around 1780, the exact same era as Henny Shorter and Sally Lewis. Her son, Bernard, is listed right here as a 36-year-old farmer alongside young 8-year-old James B. Wilson. This shows us the Wilsons were a well-established, independent agricultural family in St. Mary's County.
The Wilsons planted deep roots, and that young boy, James B. Wilson, grew up to be a highly respected, prominent citizen. But here's where it gets really interesting. Notice who he marries. Mary Julia Shorter. She was actually from a cousin branch of the Shorter family we've been tracking. So by marrying her, James legally injects the Shorter freedom suit legacy straight into the Wilson household. And together, they have a son named Thomas G. Wilson.
Which brings us to the confluence, the double merge of 1908. This is the absolute climax of our historical mystery, the exact moment where all three of these generational streams finally collide.
Look at how neatly this history aligns here. It's like a giant puzzle coming together. We've got the Shorters, the Dysons, and the Wilsons. Thanks to those marriages in the mid-1800s, the Shorter bloodline has actually entered both the Dyson and the Wilson lines. These families run parallel for over a century before converging perfectly in 1908.
This right here is what we call the double merge. Nettie and Thomas were actually both Shorter descendants through different branches. Nettie Isabella Dyson was the daughter of George Dyson and Isabella Shorter Jr. Thomas G. Wilson was the son of James Wilson and Mary Julia Shorter. So when Nettie and Thomas marry in 1908, it is a total, absolute convergence. You've got the Wilson landholding legacy, the Dyson free black legacy, and a double dose of the Shorter matrilineal freedom suit legacy, all united under one roof.
And these census documents from 1900 and 1910, they are the physical receipts of this incredible confluence, cementing Thomas and Nettie's union in the official record. In 1900, we see Thomas before the marriage. Then, boom, 1910, there they are together. Thomas G. Wilson and his wife Nettie. These aren't just random names on a page anymore. Knowing the context, we know the immense, centuries-long struggle and survival that culminated in this exact household sitting right there before the census enumerator.
But of course, a living family legacy means the river flows on. It doesn't just stop in 1908.
We can actually trace this unbroken chain from that 1908 marriage to the 1912 birth of their daughter, Yulie Isabella, all the way to the 1937 birth of the living descendant, Alfred T. Jackson. Yulie carried the combined bloodlines of Elizabeth Shorter, Sally Lewis, and Sally Wilson. That means the living descendants today are walking, breathing testaments to those 28 court victories back in 1795. It is just a stunning triumph of history.
So, I really want to leave you with this thought. Every single one of us is the result of countless intersecting rivers, ancestors who survived, who fought, and who built a path forward. The documentation is out there. It's in the census records, the court judgments, the dusty archives, just waiting for someone to connect the dots. So start digging, because you never know who's waiting in the past to say, "I've been looking for you."